with students and employers really helps me to connect the two. After today's session, you should be able to explain to friends and family how the climate school helps students to work on climate and what working on climate can look like. So before I dive into that, I wanted to go over a little bit of my background. Before joining the climate school, I worked at the engineering school for 6 years in career placement. I worked specifically with master's students and was mentored by Mindy Levinson, who was the first career placement officer at Columbia. Her work resulted in the engineering school hiring over 10 more career placement officers. So that's all to say, I learned from the best. And I started off as the coordinator for the career team while also pursuing my master's in adult learning and leadership. In 2 years, I was asked to become the career placement officer for a brand new Master of Science in Business Analytics, a partnership program with the engineering school and the business school. And I supported the first 4 cohorts. And eventually, I wanted to work on climate. And I thought I would have to leave higher ed to do that. But then I heard Columbia was starting the climate school, and I applied to be a program manager. During the interview process, I expressed that the school had a moral imperative to help these students find work. The school agreed, and they created the role that I have today. So to illustrate career support, I thought it would be great to show you what my first semester at the climate school looked like. I started working with the inaugural class of the climate school in spring of last year. So these students were already partway through their program. So I do want to note that I typically start working with students in the fall, which is their first semester. So I started meeting with students in the spring, and so my first goal was to meet with as many students as possible. For me, it's really important to establish a long-term relationship with students and get to know their backgrounds and interests. And I think that individualized coaching is really important for a master's program, especially an interdisciplinary program like ours, which attracts students from many diverse backgrounds, experience levels, as well as interests. I also wanted to highlight a few of the other activities I was engaged in that first semester. Employer calls. I correspond a lot with employers, but I also get on calls with employers, especially if they really want to think through their recruiting strategy. So an example of that was last year, Boston Consulting Group, which is a top consulting firm, was launching a brand new practice in climate and sustainability. So I met with their team that was responsible for staffing this new practice. We talked through timelines and how they could engage our students. And I'm happy to report that they ended up hiring 3 climate society students that summer, 2 as consultants and 1 as a researcher. I also like to invite employers to engage with students in person or virtually. I usually like to do that with employers that are actively recruiting. And just to highlight one of the employers from this semester that was very popular, there was an organization, an international NGO called Climate Analytics. They're not an analytics firm. They're actually an organization that helps the least developed countries and small island developing states with their climate adaptation and mitigation planning and implementation. So they were an organization that ticked a lot of boxes for people. I also like to bring in alumni and other practitioners to talk about different roles or just different experiences. So one I want to highlight was I had an alum who worked at the UN and then pivoted to the private sector. So he could speak to both what it was like to work at the UN, but also how that compares with the private sector. I also had another alum who is an angel investor in startups that focus on biodiversity. So he came to talk both about the investing side of his work, but also really encouraging people to also look at the issues around biodiversity. I'll talk more about capstones in a bit. I'm excited to share the projects that I was able to get. And then with workshops, I definitely want to also empower and enable students to conduct their search successfully. So sort of as an aside, I wanted to also highlight some of the initiatives that we do at the school level. So this could include other programs across campus that are related to the environment. So these photos here are from the career reception we did in the fall. We do this every fall, and it's an evening where students can network with practitioners, climate and sustainability practitioners. So students are rotating between tables, and then it's followed by drinks, hors d'oeuvres, and open networking. This was hosted at the Columbia Club in Midtown. So we'll be doing that every fall. And we also, every spring, host an environmental and sustainability career fair. Columbia hosts this for all of the Ivy League schools. It's usually attended by 80 employers. So it's a really exciting opportunity to see what your options are. And we are also partnering with the Columbia Alumni Association to put on more student and alumni semi-structured networking events. And speaking of alumni, we also have an alumni student mentorship program. So we work to match students with alumni. And that's done in the fall. And we also, every year we host a skill seminar series. So these are added skills that students might be interested in. Some of those have included getting LEED certified, developing digital products, writing op-eds. So I wanted to touch on employer outreach and relations, since that's a significant part of my role, and how I help students to not only navigate their search, but get in front of the right people. So as I said, I meet with a lot of students and I try to learn as much as I can. And through those conversations, I'm able to properly reach out to employers that are relevant for students. Right now, I have about 1,200 climate contacts, and these include mostly people who are team leads. I usually want to connect with people who are decision makers. And the goal for this year is to double or go beyond that, the network, because as we grow the network, the more opportunities flow our way. And when it comes to employer relations, it's more of a two-way street. So sometimes I'm the one reaching out to my contacts at organizations to highlight specific students that I think they should know about, because those students are particularly interested in their line of work. And then sometimes employers are providing opportunities to me, which I'll then share with the cohort. And so I usually ask students to send their resume to me and let me know if there's anything in particular that they want me to highlight about them to the employer. And so to give you an example of this, I was working with one student who, before entering the program, he was working in communications. And he wanted to pivot. He wanted to work on the clean energy transition as more of a policy researcher and analyst. And so he wasn't sure if he could make that pivot, but eventually I was able to contact a director at the Department of Energy whose office was working on international clean energy dialogue, diplomacy, and strategy with partnering countries and organizations. Long story short, I highlighted the student, they met with the student, they loved him, and they ended up making him an offer. So that was his way of entering into this line of work that he was really excited about. So these inroads at organizations are really critical. Just to give you one more quick example, there was another student I'd met with in our first meeting. She told me she really wanted to work with James Henson, who is maybe one of the most famous climate scientists. She was very interested in his work and his organization, which is called Climate Awareness and Solutions. And long story short, eventually I was able to write to Jim Henson about this particular student. He met her, loved her, and made her a full-time offer. So when it comes to employer relations, my philosophy is white glove service. My role is heavily relationship building. So building relationships with students who go on to be alumni, building lasting relationships with employers as well. I think that employers really like that. They have a real person as a point of contact at the climate school. And I'm happy to share that when I reach out to people, people are very excited to engage with us. And with white glove service, all I mean by that is that, we make it very easy for employers to recruit for us, make it a delightful experience, because it does lead to a lot of hiring. So I wanted to come back to one-on-one meetings because, as I said, that's a primary way that I support students. And so I wanted to give you some examples of topics that get covered in these one-on-one meetings, as well as I can share some anecdotes which can really illustrate this work. So for the brainstorming and expanding what's possible, to give you an example of that, I was meeting with one student for the first time, and she was coming from the fashion industry. And I think she was feeling like maybe she would be stuck in that box. She was curious about maybe trying to do more science research, but she was just very insecure about being able to make that pivot. But anyways, in the course of our conversation, it turned out that I learned that she was a hobby beekeeper and that her family has been beekeeping since 1936. So I raised the idea of, would she ever consider pursuing that professionally, like working with bees professionally? And the thought stunned her. But she was interested. It just never occurred to her to look, explore that area. So long story short, she spent more time researching organizations that work with bees, and she ended up with 2 offers and accepting the offer from the Bee Conservancy here in New York City. And she was able to do research with bees and also support community programming. As far as connecting students with people, as you're seeing, like that's what I do a lot of. To give you one example of that, there was another student I was working with, and in our first meeting, she's a multimedia artist, and she wanted to be able to support her art with a full-time job that she could do remotely. And eventually we converged on this idea of her becoming a user experience researcher, designing digital products, but she wanted to eventually be able to do that at the intersection of climate. I'm saying all this, but in that meeting, we didn't quite know what that would look like. But for me, I'm always like, let's do it. Let's figure out a way forward. And so I was able to get her a mentor, somebody who worked at Instagram, to mentor her. She got a mentor herself as well. And they coached her on how to develop a portfolio. And so she focused on a real job board called the Green Jobs Board. And she spent a few months researching, interviewing people, learning Figma to create the design, a brand new redesign of this job site. And when she showed me the final product, I was blown away. So I reached out to the founder of the Green Jobs Board. They met with her. They were so impressed with her work. And so they ended up making her their head of UX, user experience research. So she's very excited about joining the team and being able to launch what she designed. And these are some other typical things that I cover with students. For negotiating a salary, I'd love to give an example of that. So there was one student I was working with who was very interested in working on carbon dioxide removal, specifically around direct air capture. And so she ended up networking with a lot of people in that very small world. Everybody knows who she is. She ended up reaching out to a CEO of a startup called Captura, which removes CO2 from the ocean. And through conversation, the CEO made her an offer to work on their business development. And he asked her how much she wanted to make. She said, hold that thought. We had a discussion, and because I do collect that salary information, I was able to advise her on what someone else with a comparable profile being made an offer by a similar organization was making. And so she was able to ask for what was 6 figures and be able to get that. It's really important to have this kind of information, to be equipped with this information so that you can make sure that you're getting a competitive salary. There's another example beyond negotiating base salary. There's another student who really wanted to, he got an offer and he would need to relocate to London, but he wanted to stay in New York longer. And then he also wanted to eventually live somewhere else in the world. So he successfully negotiated that. He was able to stay in New York a month longer. And then the organization promised to relocate him to Vietnam at the end of the year. So these are some other examples of things that students can ask for and get. For pitching an organization to create a role, that right there, that is something that I'm seeing a lot of. So as you can see from my example, when I spoke with the climate school and they ended up creating this climate career coach role, it's something that I'm seeing with students. So to give you an example, there was one student who was working, had done an internship with a pretty well-known law firm. And in terms of what she wanted to do, she really had a good experience there. She thought, I'd love to work with them. So, we talked about what if she pitched the organization to hire her as their first dedicated sustainability professional. And so she worked on that. She worked on her pitch. She had like 5 pillars of the things she would be able to accomplish in that first year. She set up a meeting with some of her managers, former managers, pitched them, and they applauded her. A week later, they made her an offer. They did create this role. And then we talked about getting more money, and she successfully got more money for herself. So that was really exciting. Another example is I had a student who really wanted to work on climate storytelling. And again, we're talking and we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But through networking, she got connected to a new organization based in Hollywood that calls itself the Story Consultancy for the Climate Age. So they work with TV and film screenwriters and production studios to integrate climate into their storytelling. So she approached them, initiated this conversation, pitched them on hiring her over the summer as a fellow, which they did. They loved her. They ended up making her an associate director, and now she's both a storytelling consultant, but also responsible for helping to build out this brand new consulting practice. So another part of my role I think that it's nice that in this program you have someone to turn to talk about how hard it can be to conduct a job search. You're in grad school and that's a lot of pressure, and to conduct a search alongside that can be stressful. So, and it's stressful for anybody, no matter how much experience you have. When you embark on a job search, everyone feels very vulnerable. You start to question if anything you've ever done has value. So it's good to be able to talk through this along the way. So I do a lot of helping people to cope with the hardship and really stay motivated, because you have to keep going. And working outside the US, just one quick example of that. I was working with a student who had very specific parameters. She wanted to do her internship in Berlin because her husband was invited to teach there, and she wanted to study climate communication. She wanted to compare climate communications in the EU with that in the US. And so again, I'm always in the spirit of let's do it. So we ended up identifying a research and communication organization called More in Common that had an office in Berlin and also in New York. So I reached out to the director here in New York and just suggested that he meet with this student, that she had a very interesting idea. She met with him and his team and pitched this research idea. They said, we don't have anybody who's working on climate and we like your idea. So they set her up with a team in Berlin, and she was able to do exactly what she wanted. So I know that you all have received the PDF with career placement data, but I just wanted to quickly mention that again. So the summer is really dedicated to gaining practical experience. And also students tend to take coursework as well. So a lot of students tend to opt for an internship. It's a great way to to be able to try something, whether that's a role or an organization or field. Although a fifth of students did enter into a full-time permanent position. We also offer capstone projects as an additional avenue for gaining practical experience. And these are great projects. And I did have some students working on both capstone projects and internships. With the capstone projects, they can be really great if they really align with your own interests and goals. So I wanted to share what some of these projects were that students could choose from. So Climate Power, so this organization, they wanted a group of students to study climate misinformation and disinformation in Spanish-speaking communities in 5 swing states. And so it was novel research, and they wanted to use this research to inform a disinformation mitigation campaign that they were going to launch later in the year. So that was very exciting for students to delve into a topic that hasn't been explored very much. And Value Reporting Foundation is an organization that is responsible, like a primary organization for developing climate reporting standards. And so they wanted students to look at both current and emerging climate disclosure standards in the world and report on that. And some of the students were really interested in that because they knew like that would help position them for what they wanted to do next. And I just wanted to highlight that some of those students, like one of them went on to become a senior ESG analyst at NASDAQ. The other one became a senior communications and engagement specialist at the Wharton School of Business, their ESG Institute. The Cornell Industry and Labor Relations Group, they wanted students to study really what the EU is doing with offshore wind in terms of their labor, their supply chain, and what we could learn and apply here in New York State. And lastly, for Met Capital Management, it's a very fascinating group that's trying to use the global capital markets to absorb the financial fallout of catastrophic weather events. So very intriguing group. They're actually in this case, only one student was interested in this project, and we were able to get the employer to then convert this into a paid summer internship. So I wanted to talk about, so for this very first cycle, what the placement looked like. I'm talking about like right after students leave the program. I'm excited by the placement rate, but also the quality of placement. The fact that students were able to go into 38 fields, to me, shows that there really isn't any door you can't open. So as I mentioned, there are 38 fields. Here are the top 14 fields. Consulting is number one. I mentioned Boston Consulting Group, but a lot of other consulting firms are seeing that if they are playing the role of advising other organizations, they're going to need climate talent, people with a climate lens to advise on various issues from decarbonizing to mitigating their risks. And these are just some examples of where people went to work after the program. Happy to answer any questions about any of these roles. And I also included this in the PDF I shared with you, but just wanted to quickly go over that again in terms of looking at that first cohort and seeing what was really being asked of them. I kind of distilled it down to these different tasks. So organizations, whether they already have plans or proposals or they want to develop them, they really need people who know something about climate to have input. We recently did an alumni panel, and there was one recent graduate who's working in climate tech, working at a startup that's trying to decarbonize concrete. And they mentioned that from their observations in climate tech, there's a lack of people who have any sort of climate background. And so they think that there's very much a need for people to enter that space who know what they're talking about, who can point out, what the unintended consequences of our plans are, and if our plans are even effective. With developing guides and resources, there was another capstone project I didn't mention from Waterfront Alliance. What they did was they asked students to create a climate literacy toolkit that would enable people at the neighborhood level here in New York City to meaningfully participate in climate mitigation and adaptation planning. And so they produced this whole toolkit that then was not only shared with these community stakeholders, but also shared with K through 12 educators. Communications is I think communications is part of almost everyone's role. And doing policy research, building and stewarding strategic partnerships, that's also really big. And also before, I forgot to add one more slide. We do have some info sessions coming up that I would be delighted to invite people to. We have an info session with the US EPA and another info session from the Congressional Research Service. They're a group in Congress that advises members of Congress on complex topics. So we'll have two people from the Congressional Research Service who specialize in climate. And so when I say they advise members of Congress, they spend 90% of their time speaking directly with those people in person or over the phone, and only 10% of their time writing up reports. So it's a very fascinating role that they play. So I'm excited to have them present their work, and they are also recruiting. but that is, I'll stop here. That's some of what career support looks like. One of my colleagues is on this call, Jana Zeltzer. She's a program manager, and so she's going to be joining me to help build out this career office. So we'll be able to do even more programming, more employer info sessions, and alumni career chats.
Thank you, Gerald. We have a lot of questions coming in, which is great. Would you like me to read them off, Gerald? Would that be easiest?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
So the first question came in from Christian. Oh, Christian gave some really great feedback. Thank you for the phenomenal presentation. Does the Climate School provide salary information for the recent graduates? Also, have you ever assisted graduates with starting their own business or nonprofit?
Oh, yes. Yes, and yes. So I do collect salary data because I do want to help students navigate negotiations in an informed manner. And so that's why I gave that example of being able to inform that student about what they should be expecting from a climate tech startup like this. So as I mentioned, there are 38 fields from that the first cohort went into. So it's important to be able to, there's not a one size fits all. So I'm here as a resource for students. If you have an offer that, we can talk about it and I can share what I have. And then as far as helping students to start their own business, yes, I have talked to a number of students in the past when I was at the engineering school about starting their own business. And so I'm aware of the different resources here at Columbia to help entrepreneurs. For example, we do have a startup lab here at Columbia. It's in Soho, and we have even beyond that, a team that provides a lot of different resources to Columbia entrepreneurs. I'm also connected with a number of incubators and venture capital firms that want to encourage students to work on climate. I'm actually going to be partnering with SOSV, which is a really big venture capital firm and incubator. They do a climate tech summit every year and a climate tech 100 list every year. So they also want to encourage more students to become entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Gerald. And we got another great question that came in. Could you speak a bit more about the F1 student visas if they get full-time offers for OPT and the potential H-1B after completion of the program? I know that gets granular, but could you speak to a little bit about the OPT process for our international population?
Sure. So yeah, they're for international students. So during the summer term, you will have CPT, which is the authorization to work off campus while you're a student, because you will still be a student during the summer term. And then after you complete your program in mid-August, you can start OPT, which is work authorization after you've right after you finish your program. And so, so some students do opt to stay in the US. To give you a few examples, I had one student from China who got an offer from McKinsey. So he moved to Boston to work there as an insights analyst on their sustainability team. And I had another student from Belgium who is staying here in New York City, working for an association that's trying to decarbonize the airline industry. And then I have another student who's from London who is staying here and is working for the New York City Emergency Management Division. So students are able to stay here and work. And this is even though it's called an MA in Climate Society, it's a STEM degree. So students are eligible for the OPT STEM extension, which gives you an additional 2 years on top of that 1 year of OPT. So students can stay here for up to 3 years without needing H-1B sponsorship.
Thanks, Gerald. And then I'm going to throw another one. This is a very specific question, so forgive me
Sure.
if it's too specific, but I think it's a great
Sure.
question. Um, can you speak to food security job opportunities, types of organizations? Have we seen anybody in the food security space in this most recent cohort by chance?
Yeah, I did. There is one student who is working, I believe it's called like the Bainham Foundation, working on food security with them. There's another student who he went to work for CG, I believe it's called CGIAR. And so he's actually looking at both foods, he's a researcher. He's looking at both food security, but also how he's looking at conflict drivers. So climate is obviously going to exacerbate drivers of conflict. So he's looking at both the intersection of conflict and food security.
Some of the students have been asking for the PDF. I just want to let everybody know I will make sure to share Gerald's phenomenal PDF document again with everybody, just in case you didn't get a chance or you didn't spot it in the email or you might have lost the email. So I'll make sure to share that out again. No worries there. In terms of, this is actually a great one. Andrew's asking, do you have any statistics of students who get full-time offers from the same employer who gave the summer internship, that kind of bridge? And if not necessarily statistics, do you typically see that, Gerald?
Yeah, that does happen. I can follow up with that stat. I don't have that on hand, but it does happen. Like, for example, that example I gave with the student working with the storytelling consultancy, that converting to a full-time permanent position.
And guys, feel free if you want to come off camera and ask. I know Gerald specifically asked that I make sure to make this a meeting so everybody can kind of get to know one another. So if anybody wants to go off camera or unmute themselves to ask a question, please feel free to.
I have a question. So I guess it's two-pronged. So is it possible to work full-time through the program, and then prior to coming to campus in the fall, am I able to leverage your relationships and your career services prior?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you a couple examples. Like in this inaugural class, we did have a student who was a fund manager for an impact investing firm that was based in Germany. So he was here working full-time for a company based in Germany while going through this program. And he wasn't necessarily looking for another job, but we still met, and I was able to get him meetings with some really interesting bigger funds like TPG Rise Climate, which is a $10 billion fund focused on investing in climate solutions. So that's all to say, yes, like I would welcome speaking with those who are mid-career or people who are still or who happen to be working, because I'd love for you to also explore what your options are. So that student was taking meetings, just seeing what else is out there. Also, there was in this current class a student that, because I'm always encouraging a lot of these meetings to happen, he ended up meeting with the team at Morgan Stanley, who run their Sustainability Institute, and they were just having a conversation, and that led to them revealing that they were developing a role. And so in short, they ended up offering him this full-time position, and so he actually started this full-time position at the start of this spring semester. It's not necessarily something that I would encourage people to do, because I think that the program is really is a lot to handle by itself, but there is precedent for other people working full-time.
Thank you. So this is probably more of an offline question, but I want to pursue BCG partnering with the climate school, and post MBA opportunity in consulting would be a pretty good fit for me. So I can reach out.
Wonderful. Yes. Like I said, I think when it comes to consulting, that's an area that's really, really, I think that's going to increase even more. So I think with BCG starting that new practice last year, I mean, they're really leading the way, but I'm speaking to other consulting firms. Like, for example, I recently spoke with IDEO, which is, people think of them, they think of like design thinking, and they work with some pretty big clients. But they were talking to me because they were talking about how they're going to start ramping up recruiting people with climate lenses. That in the past 5 years alone, they have done about 70 climate related projects, one of them being with Ford, with their rollout of the electric F-150. So that's all to say, like, I see a lot more consulting firms connecting with us.
And one thing I do want to just note, just to protect Gerald's time too, you should be a deposited student before, a committed student before engaging with Gerald. So I just wanted to just highlight that for everybody in the group. That's very generous of you. Gerald also works with our alumni, so we just want to protect their time. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions, guys? We love questions.
Hi, I have a question. So I'm currently deciding between the Columbia Climate School MA and the MPH at Mailman, and both are so fascinating to me, but the things that you've described are also sound amazing. So I was wondering if your services or help is limited to the climate school, or if it would be somewhat possible to meet with you from other schools in Columbia. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So right now, I am dedicated to climate and society. So as far as individualized coaching, I'm really focused on this program, although some of the programming that I and some of my colleagues are putting on, I tend to share across other programs.
Got it. Thank you.
So that's to say, Rachel, you know which program's the best fit if you want to work with Gerald. So. And I see a couple other students asking some questions. Jen's asking, have you helped students transfer to a career in academia? Is it possible to continue on to a PhD? Actually, Jen, Gerald does highlight some PhDs. I'll allow Gerald to note that.
Yes, a number of students will either focus on, they know while they're in the program that they want to pursue a PhD, or it might be after they leave the program, and we'll reconnect and we'll talk about their path to finding PhD programs, reaching out to faculty, putting together their application. So I've helped students with that as well.
And then Jerry asks, and I'm wondering if you've had any more discussion in the area of media, advertising, communication, branding regarding climate employers. Thanks. I'm glad you joined, Jerry.
Yeah, hi, Jerry. Yes, I remember you. So actually recently, I was just meeting with a student who wanted to, she had this epiphany that she wanted to work in climate communications, and maybe in PR, marketing, communications, PR. And so long story short is we looked at one of the top PR firms in the world, and we happened to discover they had a global climate chair. And so she reached out to this person, and he was delighted to meet with her. So they're in conversation right now. So that's something that could open up more opportunities for students. She was so encouraged by that outreach and that response that the next day she reached out to the head of communications at the United Nations, climate communications at the United Nations. And that person also immediately responded and set up a call with her the very next day. So these are just a couple of things that just happened related to like communications and marketing.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
I have a quick question. Hey, Gerald, I'm Joey. So I saw that there were a couple jobs within the federal space. So right now, what departments do you have connections with? And are you looking to expand relationships with different departments in the federal space in the next coming years?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different agencies that I'm connected with. Like the Federal Energy for Regulatory Commission, of course, the Department of Energy. There are, I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's definitely where I have a lot of contacts as well, because I know there is, thanks to the current administration, there's more resources being put into that. So like that's why I also partner with like the US EPA. There's also FEMA. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the organizations I just spoke with is the Clean Air Task Force. And although they're not in the federal government, they're going to be submitting a capstone project to us to help the Department of Energy and the EPA distribute resources to environmental justice communities in an equitable way. So they're going to have students conducting research to figure out what is the disconnect between these federal agencies and the support they should be providing. And so how can we involve these environmental justice communities and their input to improving this sort of relationship. And so they'll also be having students actually travel to these communities. So there's Ironbound, there's Navajo Nation, and also Cancer Alley. So an example of like how we work directly with federal agencies and also indirectly through other groups that are trying to support these initiatives.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, Laura asked a great question. What do you normally observe as the typical application time if you want to start working full-time at the end of summer? I imagine this will vary by employment sector, but is there a general timeline?
Yeah, there's not a general timeline because people are very, they're interested in very different things. So there isn't really one. I will say that so some students, they luck out, they get like a full-time position that starts in the summer. But I don't think that you should impose that expectation on yourself. Like I said, the program, being in the program can be intense enough. And so the summer is also a time where you might be less, there might be less coursework for you, so you could dedicate more time to really finding the right next thing for you, because for me it's like supporting students to find something that they really are excited about, not just any job, and so sometimes that takes a little more time. So it just depends on your own circumstances, your own goals, and because I would say that full-time recruiting is happening all the time. And so right now that we're like mid-March, so the current class, for example, they can start, it might be around this time that they can start being viable candidates for full-time positions that'll start in the summer. But we had, like, for example, for BCG, I didn't start speaking with them till midsummer. Then they started recruiting. And so they ended up, one of our students, I think it was only like a month was the recruiting process for her. So she ended up getting that offer kind of near the end of summer.
Excellent. And another question came in from Zarin asking about positions other than the GRA. So I just want to note this, that, in your acceptance letters, we highlight graduate research assistantships. I just want to highlight that we typically have around 20 of those positions. So we have more students than we have GRA positions. So there is a competitive application process that occurs early in the fall semester as it relates to graduate research assistantships. But beyond that, there's actually many other opportunities that occur throughout the fall and spring semester. There's TA opportunities, for example. Gerald or Yana, do you either one of you want to speak to kind of different opportunities that come up as it relates to working on campus beyond the graduate research assistantship opportunities that we highlight?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that, Alfred, actually, and hi, everyone. My name is Jan. I'm an academic affairs program manager here at the Climate School. And in addition to working with Gerald, I also work with our other colleagues at the Climate School. And one of the things that I'm involved in is the student programs that the Climate School offers, not just to climate and society students, but also to our partner programs that have interest in some of the topics that are broadly covered under the umbrella of the Climate School. And through our student programs in that regard, we offer internships and employment opportunities on campus in fall, spring, and summer semesters, and they run for a fall-spring cycle similar to a GRA, and we typically get opportunities from faculty and researchers across the campus. They create positions, so the nature of those positions vary, and then students are invited to apply towards the end of September, I believe, and then it's the same, also a competitive process, but it does sort of offer up more of a variety of opportunities that are very much in line with people who are interested in getting experience in the sciences, in different types of research that's being done on campus, and that's certainly available for all. And then we also do have a job board. We have an online interface called Simplicity that's home right now to job postings where different employers might also offer fellowships or internships or part-time opportunities to students. So that's an off-campus asset. So those are just some of the things that are available in addition to the possibility of a GRA.
Thanks, Yana. I appreciate that. And I have one more question, and I do want to be respectful of time. We dedicated an hour for this, but Farida asks, huge shout out to Gerald. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. I was wondering if the school has any partnerships with international organizations such as the UN for summer internships. Also, I wanted to know if you have any alumni working within the organization.
Oh, yes, we do have a number of alumni working at like the UN, the World Bank, and the UN is massive. There are so many different groups within the UN. So we do have alumni there, always happy to connect people. I'm in touch with a lot of different team leads as well. The one thing I'll note is that with the UN, very few of their internships are paid. Something that I want to underscore is that I almost never promote unpaid work because I don't think that students need help finding unpaid work. So I pretty much share paid work. There's very rare instances where I would share an unpaid opportunity. The one exception that I made this semester was the head of climate communications at the UN did want an intern. And so we talked about it, and it seemed more like an opportunity for a student working under this person to really learn a whole lot. So it was like the one exception I made, but we definitely have people who are working within the UN system.
Excellent. And I think we have time for just one more question. If there's another question that anybody else wants to throw out there, that would be great. Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you, Lilia.
Well, there is one question I saw
Yes.
that I'd like to address is
Absolutely.
somebody asked if do you need a job placement as soon as you graduate to apply for OPT? No, you don't need an offer to apply for OPT. You can apply for OPT and you can set the start date, sometime after your program, and then you'll have 90 days to secure employment.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gerald, for this phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much, Yana, for participating as well and lending your perspective. And I just wanted to say a huge congratulations again to our admitted students. I'll let Gerald, this was Gerald's show, so I'll allow them to give final remarks.
Yeah, no, I just want to congratulate everyone for being here, and just want to share, I'm always excited to talk about all of these wonderful ways that students are able to get plugged in to do very important, meaningful, necessary work. So anyways, delighted to be in your company.
All right, take care, everybody. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns as it relates to next steps. Please feel free to reach out to me at the general admissions email. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week.